Hello and welcome. Today's discussion surrounds the business challenges of uncovering your business's brand. And joining us today is President and co-founder at Matchstick, Craig Johnson. Craig, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Jason. Glad to be here.
Oh, we're very glad to have you, and this is going to be a great conversation. I think a lot of folks are going to be very interested in understanding, about brand identity and the responsibilities that follow through with all of that. In fact, I think that why don't we start with that? So,
Yeah, great.
in terms of your experience, when an organization is trying to understand their brand or their identity, what exactly does that mean? And are they separate? So, could you
Yeah,
elaborate on that?
yeah, that's a great question. Well, and brand can be a loaded word, right?
Hmm.
We say we're a brand identity house, but does brand mean your logo? Does brand mean your culture? People say brand is a promise. We would say that kind of the sum of all of that is that your brand is your reputation, very simply. So it's what do other people say about you when you're not around? And really, who do they say you are? I'm really less interested as a brand consultant about whether people like you and customer satisfaction. And really, I want to know how do they define who you are? What makes you different than the competition? What makes you unique? And so if your brand is your reputation, that's something that's not really controlled by you because that lives in the hearts and minds of your customers, of your employees, of partners. But what you can control is your identity. That's who you are, and that's how you express yourself. And
Hmm.
so, I talk to a lot of CEOs and say, hey, I don't need a brand consultant. I know what my brand is. And you know what? Every single CEO does, and they should. That's part of their job as a CEO. But the question I always ask them is that the same thing that your customers would say? And
Hmm.
that's where I get more question marks. And well, I'm not sure. Well, would you like to know that? Yeah, well, let's go through a process to uncover what that is, and let's really find out, how close to what you say the brand is, do your customers say what your brand is and who you are. And that really allows us to understand the reputation. So then there's really this, all of our projects is first about kind of saying who do we want to be known for, what do we want to be known for, and what are our customers know us for, and then how wide is the gap between those two, and that really helps us understand, to what degree do we need to evolve our identity to really begin to connect with our customers and begin to build the reputation that we want to have.
Interesting. So so the journey really is understanding how do I get the two, brand and identity, to get as closely matched as possible. Uh,
Yeah, I would define any great brand. And whenever we talk about great brands, a
yeah.
lot of times I say people think about what I call sexy brands. Starbucks, Nike, Apple. To me those are the sexy brands. But a great brand, it doesn't matter the size of the organization. It's just how closely aligned is the reputation that you want to have, who you say you are in the boardroom.
Mm.
How closely is that aligned with what your customer on the street says? And when those two things are matching, then we've achieved, we have a great brand. And I could be a consultant of one and have a great brand, or I could be a company of 100,000 people and have a great brand. So
Interesting.
either way, it's just about making sure that those two things match up, and being sure that we can clearly see both of them, because a lot of times we can only see one half of the equation.
Sure, I bet, and I'm sure that's where, yeah, when you're speaking with the CEO, they have a very clear understanding of what the expectation is, but then there's that reality of how are their clients, what is the perception of who they are,
Yeah.
aligned with that. Interesting.
Yeah, and
Very
and you know what I say, if a CEO of a company could meet with every customer for an hour and explain who they are and what the mission was and what the vision was, like every single customer would be, they'd buy hook, line, and sinker, because I get the opportunity to sit down with these CEOs, and I'm bought in, I get it,
good.
right? So then, but CEO doesn't have that much time to do that, especially as the company gets bigger and bigger. And so we need some sort of other vehicle to communicate that a whole lot quicker, so that people can really understand and get the vision. And sometimes, we have a split second when someone hits the homepage of your website to begin to get a general feel for who you are,
Mm.
an idea. And so that's where we get into, the whole, we're an identity shop, which means that we have a strategic side of that. and we have a creative side of that. That's where we get into the creative of saying, okay, the strategic side helps us define this is what we want to be known for, and that's what we work with our clients and their leadership teams doing. And the creative says, how do we get people to understand that in a split second?
Gotcha.
And so there's the whole, visually, how are we expressing ourselves? Verbally, how are we expressing ourselves? And how do we begin to quickly allow people to understand it? And you really, this is the same thing that we do as people, right? I have my own personal beliefs and values and what I want to accomplish and what I want to be known for. And then I have, all right, how am I going to interact with the world? So how am I going to dress? That should align with the reputation that I want to build. That should, the way that I speak, the way that I treat people. So I always kind of use the analogy of, if somebody says, hey, I'm really having a hard time making any friends, can you help me? Right. This is what we do with organizations. And one of the first things you could do is you could say, all right, well, I hear the result that you don't have any friends. I hear you telling me that you're a really great guy, and I get it. So let me watch you. Let's go to a party and let me just stand back and be a bystander and watch you, and then at the end of the night, you could come in and say, hey, you know how you interrupted that guy when you were talking? You were always talking about yourself. You're putting people down. All these are things that these are ways that you're expressing yourself. You're not looking people in the eye when you talk to them. This is maybe one of the reasons why you're not achieving the reputation that you want to have, and you're not building those lifelong friendships. So let's talk about how do we need to change the way that you interact with people, the way you interact with the world, in order to build the reputation that you believe that you should have and you want to have. So it's the same thing. How does organizations need to change the way that they present themselves to the world, their unique identity, in a way that will allow folks to really see them in the way that they know that they believe to be seen?
Yeah. Gosh, there's two things that I really want to pull out of that. Is the first is, I love that you clarified that you look at both the strategic and the creative elements of this journey. And I think a lot of folks, especially I would say entrepreneurs, when they're first starting up, it's all creative, right? They have this idea of what they want to be. So they're like, I want to be this cool color. I want to have this neat logo. And they're like, that's my brand. And that's it, right? It's like,
Yeah.
and there's a whole nother level of that beyond creative. The creative aspect is that, yeah, going to the party and watching how we're interacting and seeing how your product actually is being utilized. Is it functional? How does, what is that experience, and what is the reaction to that experience, et cetera?
Yeah. Exactly.
Interesting. And I guess the next part of that, the second part of what you were talking about, is when people do come to you, I'm very curious to know, where are they in their journey? Are they entrepreneurs? How long have they been in business? I guess if you could just kind of walk us through some examples of when clients come to you and what stage of the business are they at when they reach out?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, there's multiple stages that people come to us in, and we've kind of customized our service packages accordingly. But we have folks that come to us as they have not even, they're in the middle of building their product and they're getting ready to launch. And I always say their goal is to really launch with a bang. I find entrepreneurs, there's kind of two mindsets. One is, I'm going to stay as lean as possible and let this kind of grow, and I'll kind of, evolve it as it grows. And then you have the entrepreneur that says, you know what, I'm going to put a ton of resources behind this. I'm going to try to save time, and I'm going to try to really launch with a bang. And usually really the difference is the first time entrepreneur versus the second, third, fourth time entrepreneur. Usually if they've already done it successfully before, they don't want to take as much time as they did the first go around. And they said, and usually they have more money at their disposal. So they're saying, I'd rather pay a little bit more money now to save time, versus the first time bootstrap entrepreneur is saying, I'll save money now and I'll give up a little bit of time. Right. So that's one stage. And then you have the people that say, sometimes that bootstraps entrepreneur comes to us once they've really begun to build some momentum, and they said, hey, you know what? We kind of just slapped this whole identity together to try to get things off the ground. And now that things are really rolling, we're hearing comments like, people not sure that we're really a legit company when they look at when they see us online,
Mm.
or sometimes it's when competition hits people that it really kills the entrepreneur when they see a company that they know is not as good as them. They're a lot smaller than them. They may just be a startup, but dadgummit, they have this really good branding, and they're getting more attraction from the market, right? And so they say, hey, competition is always the great equalizer. It really will get people to say, hey, we need to level up our whole image. So, and then you have companies that have been around sometimes 10, 15, sometimes multiple decades, and they've been growing so much, but they've almost, in that rapid growth process, they've lost a sense of their identity. And they said, man, we got to kind of come back to the heart of this, especially in situations where they've been acquiring companies, because now you have culture that has acquired companies, and they've pulled these other groups in, these other cultures, and they hadn't really clearly defined for the staff even, this is really who we are. And so then a lot of that's even from an HR perspective. How do we reduce turnover? How do we get people bought into the mission of where we're going? And then same thing with the customer. How do we get customers to not see us as that other company anymore, but see us as this new entity?
Mm.
So in that situation, we got to kind of, they're in that rapid growth process, but we kind of have to pause and even almost rewind back to the founding story and say, hey, what was this all about? And how do we make sure that we can capture the heart of that? Keep what's important from our history, but then also look to the future.
Mm.
So that's always a process that's important to go through with any of those clients. And then you have the bigger companies that are spinning off smaller products. And so
Right.
that's another customer set for us. So again, all of those three different groups have a little bit different mindsets, and they're looking for a little bit different things. And so we customize how we do things, and for each one of those customers. But those are kind of the three main points at which we find people: A, startup mode; B, I've been growing so much and I got to kind of reroute ourselves; and C, hey, we're this big entity and now we're spinning off these smaller products. And interestingly, the products they're spinning off are kind of the same as the entrepreneur products they're doing. They're just coming out of this massive organization.
Hi there. I hope you're enjoying the show. We'd love to get to know you. We help creative companies get work done by delivering a simple, strategic, and human IT experience. If you'd like to talk to one of us, go to ripplit.com/sign-me-up. We'd love to get to know you more. Thank you, and back to the show. Is there a sweet spot with, that you've seen, like that, okay, this is an optimal time to reconsider your brand, or is that irrelevant?
It maybe seems too simple, but it really always comes back to that reputation issue. And when do they feel like they're starting to lose control of what that reputation is? So again, sometimes that's when there's the drastic change in the industry, and they need to reposition to stay competitive. Sometimes that's when, again, they've acquired these companies in, and they really need to focus the culture around what they do, because that has to do with the reputation the employees have of the organization. But there's always when there's a little bit of that disconnect, and the goal is again, what we want to be known for is what we're actually known for, and how do we define what that is? Because sometimes that's the hardest part for some companies, is you have a leadership team that has a lot of different opinions about even what their reputation should be. And so sometimes it's interesting alignment with strategic planning too, because I would say 50% of the time our work kind of comes before strategic planning, because if they say, all right, this is our identity, what do we need to do to live this out? And then I have 50% of clients that go through some sort of strategic planning process, and out of that, one of their core initiatives is, hey, we got to get better at telling our story. We got to realign ourselves to be more, to connect better with our employees and to compete in the market. So strategic planning is another trigger point that I see a lot.
Interesting. Can you let's dive into that a little bit more, because I think I can imagine leadership teams, either senior leadership teams or whichever, but like they have this very clear understanding or close to clear understanding of what their brand is, what their identity is. But yeah, the actual execution of it, I could see internally being a big challenge. And how do I know when you don't have those opportunities to be the CEO in those meetings, and you're relying on the rest of the organization to act on your behalf, to speak that message? What are your experiences in terms of executing on brand internally so that externally folks are getting the right message?
Yeah. So, and that comes back to the whole culture side of things,
Yeah.
where, we think about, all right, the marketing side of the brand, right? And how do we make sure that we're true to who we are, we're unique and differentiated with the competition, and we're connecting well with the customer.
Hmm.
But then, there's a whole team of people that have to now live this out.
Yeah.
And are they really bought into it? And so that's where we talk a lot about, one of our key phrases, we talk about igniting passionate brands. We wrote a book called Igniting Passionate Brands, because we think where the real magic is, yes, we do the creative work, we do the positioning work, and that's great. But where the real power is when you get this whole group of people that are all aligned around this common identity, and
Mm.
they're all waving the same flag, and they're super proud of it, and they're marching in the same direction, and they're singing off the same song sheet, whatever, use whatever analogy you want. But that's where you really have the opportunity for real impact, when you get that full on cultural alignment. And so, we've worked with clients to, with different programs to say, all right, what does it look like to make sure that we have our cultures aligned? And a lot of times that comes into place where you have different offices, right? We got, the Atlanta office, but we got the Chicago office and the Dallas office and the Denver office. Is there a different sense of who we are in those different offices? Because it's only one website that the customer finds.
Mm.
So you ideally, just like I want to go into a Starbucks and the employees to treat me and their the way that they act, I want that to feel the same if I'm in Atlanta versus New York City versus Tupelo, Mississippi, right?
Right.
So same thing, even with a service business, that you have these people that are delivering on these brand values, and to what degree is that whole culture aligned around it?
Interesting. Wow. I think that is where it just gets so wonderfully complex and
Yeah,
challenging,
yeah,
because
definitely.
you hire these rock stars, right, to work with you, but you also have this belief pattern. And I guess it just seems like everything that you're doing here, understanding your identity, how people are responding to you, what your actual brand is, and then you hire people that need to be fit into that, or that already represented to a certain level, and they can be, I guess, learned into it.
Yeah.
um,
Well,
yeah.
and going back to the CEO thing, any organization ultimately is kind of a reflection of that CEO and of
Mm.
that leader, especially when it's a founder, right? And
Yeah.
the organizational identity is typically rooted in the identity of the founder. But even if the founder moves on and a new leader comes on board, he wants the identity to reflect the culture of who he is. There's a way that they want to do business. There's a posture they want to have to the market. Or they want to posture as the big, strong behemoth, or do they want to posture as, hey, we're here to be a helper and be a friend. And so that's where you really always have to go back to some of that founding story, and some of the DNA and the way that the founder wants to do business. And then how do you capture that, bottle it up, and then
Mm.
share it and get everybody else to buy into it?
That's actually, I looked at just on your website, through your the portfolio that you have there. There's the buyer, the founder's journey is critical to so many of these stories. And what is your process of just learning about these stories?
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite that complicated. A lot of it's just really understanding, spending some time with that founder to understand, what are the things that that person's really passionate about. And we don't do it just with the founder. We ask everybody, you
Mm,
know, why here? Why do you want to work here?
mm,
What keeps you coming back? And, you know, we can go through an exercise of, hey, if you won the Mega Millions and you didn't need the money, what about this place would bring you back? And that's where you can really uncover a lot of that gold of what we're really looking for. What's special here, and what's different, and what's true, right? What's real? We say that a lot of our process is like digging for gold.
mm,
You know, it's there. It's under the. Sometimes it's certain companies. It's maybe a little bit more buried than others. But
mhm.
our job is to go there, dig for it, find it, pull it out of the ground, shine it, you know, and show it off for the world to see, and kind of remind people that, hey, this is the gold we have. Let's not forget it. Let's remember it.
That's, you know, you just nailed on something that I've been observing about how technology has really
Mm,
reshaped how a message gets across. I mean, you know, in
mm,
particular with organizations, I mean, you have people that are capable of within one quick handheld recording reshape an organization in less than 30 seconds, whether it's good or bad,
yeah,
which is phenomenal. And it's there. You tapped into something I wanted to talk about, which is just true authenticity. And then that's, it seems like that's kind of what you're trying to uncover when you talk to the organization, that, yeah, you win the Mega Millions. Where, what is that moment that says, I still want to work here? I know I don't need to,
yeah,
I want to.
yeah.
And
Well, and a lot of it is we use the term conviction a lot. Like, what is this organization's convictions, right? Because we know, hey, we have a product or service that we're going to sell in the market, and there's a transaction there that we deliver, you know, value, whether functional value, emotional, probably somewhat of a mix of the two. Um, but how do we go back to, you know, what do we really believe? And I think that that's one thing that sometimes organizations forget. They're so worried about how do we connect with the customer and
Mhm.
how do we stand out from the competition, that they forget to say, you know, well, what do we think is important? You know, what is the role that we believe that we play in the world? Us, you know, that's maybe a little bit bigger than just a functional benefit, you know. And I love to, one of my favorite examples is Nike, right? I mean, Nike, I'm wearing Nike shoes right now, right? They sell you know, cool shoes and other sports products, right? I mean, you could say that's the functional value,
Mhm.
but there's this whole emotional side
Oh yeah.
of, you know, Nike, kind of that, you know, that underlying kind of conviction and theme is all about victory,
Mm.
right? And so, you know, you know, Nike is the Greek goddess of victory, and everything that they do is trying to help any athlete, you know, get a little bit better what they do. Get, you know, how do we help you win? How do we help you achieve victory? And what's great about that is, number one, you know, they use, I don't see them use that word a lot, but whenever I talk about it with people, there's a lot of head nods, just like I'm
Mhm.
seeing from you. You know, you feel that it resonates. I mean, even, you know, just do it, find your greatness, you know, all of that is about how do I win. And they really, what's interesting about Nike too, they don't, I, I can't ever remember seeing them advertise their products.
Right.
They only advertise that idea. And then when I, you know, obviously we're all aware of who Nike is at this point, right? So
Yeah.
we don't have to, there's not an education there. So then I walk into a shoe store and I see Nike, I remember that idea and those feelings, and I'm more than, you know, connected to their products.
Hmm.
But it's because, you know, they're convicted by that. And it's not just that they have that, you know, that, and that goes back to the founding story, right?
Mhm.
Of that coach using the rubber and the waffle iron to put on the shoes to help these kids, like, on the track team, win, you know. So it goes back to that founding story. And you fast forward to today, and they're hiring former professional athletes and Olympic athletes. So their whole culture is centered around this idea of how do we help people win.
Love it. That's excellent. I think that really ties in everything that we just talked about really well, whether you're starting your organization, you're 5 to 10 years in, you've acquired companies, and you're trying to understand who you are today versus where you were yesterday, and then also just understanding how you can educate the organization around you to represent the identity, that the brand of your organization, and know that there could be a difference between the two as you're trying to get them closer together. Craig, this has been really great. I just wanted to touch a little bit about you and Matchstick, and just learn a little bit more about what you're doing today. I guess the first question I'd love to understand is,
Yeah.
when people reach out to you specifically at Matchstick, I'm sorry, when people reach out to Matchstick, what are some of the most common business challenges that you're responding to when people first reach out?
Again, it may be simply, hey, we have a new product
Hmm.
we got to launch. It may be, hey, we're acquiring this company. It may be, hey, I'm starting up this new company. And interestingly, with kind of the companies that have been growing for a while, I say a lot of times our job is more of a cleanup job than creating new things. So it's, hey, we have 17 different logos that we're using, and if I ask our executive team who we are in one sentence, I get 10 different responses from 10 different people.
Hmm.
Can you come in and try to clean this up? So the biggest challenge that I see is, it's not that people haven't created enough new things, it's that they've created too many new things, and they began to cause confusion with their customers, because they have, maybe they grew and they started this company and this brand, and then they said, hey, we have this new thing we're going to launch. Let's come up with a new name for it. Let's come up with a new logo for it. And then they do that, multiply that out over, 10, 20 years. And all of a sudden somebody comes in and they look at it and they say, this thing was a total mess. We had a client that we kind of broke the record for the number of different URLs they had. They had, hundreds of URLs for different things that they were doing. Yet when somebody said, can you just tell me how this all fits together as one organization? Nobody could, there was a lot of head scratching. So we had to kind of create this larger story. And I think that's a common situation, is instead of just talking about the specific products and services, especially as we expand it, now we have to elevate up and tell what's that one larger story that ties them all together. And
Hmm.
it's really important to think about the order of how you tell your story. So let's start with, the bigger ideas of our convictions and our beliefs, and the big picture value that we offer. Then we can go down and say, hey, and here's this particular service we offer. Here's how it ladders up into that one. Here's this one. Here's how this ladders up.
Hmm.
And you know what? These all don't need their own unique names and logos. This can be just a simple descriptive name that describes the service that you provide, because that then retains that brand equity and that master brand.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's a lot of different situations, but again, it really always comes back to, do customers see us the way that we know we should be seen? Do our employees really buy in to the mission? So sometimes it's, how do we better connect with the market? Sometimes it's, how do we better connect with our employees? And sometimes it's, the practical nature of, there's these two companies that are merging, and what are we going to call it moving into the future?
Hmm. Excellent. Anything exciting that you're working on or you wanted to share that's going on at Matchstick?
Yeah, so I mean, really, our big picture goal, what we're trying to do is really, the big brand identity firms that are around the country nationally are really kind of more on the West Coast or up in the Northeast, and nobody's really claimed that in the South. And so we said, hey, we want to be the brand identity firm of the South, and how do we help the bigger companies that are here think, hey, maybe I don't have to go to New York. How do we get the kids coming out of school to say, hey, if I want to go work and do some really great brand identity work, I don't have to go to San Francisco. I don't have to go to New York. I can stay here and do it. Because there's almost a mentality, especially kids coming out of school, they're almost being told, like, hey, if you want to do big things, you can't stay in the South. And so that's what our heart is. And we do a lot with the creative community. In fact, one of the things that you should check out, so my business partner, Blake, and our creative director, he just launched a new podcast called The Creative Rising.
Cool.
And it's really all about challenges that creative leaders are working to overcome. And so he's interviews a lot of different creative professionals. I think he's on the third or fourth one right now. I mean, it's all about, he basically did a survey. So we run this, the Atlanta chapter of Creative Morning. So did this big survey of what are the top fears or challenges that creative professionals have. And
Mhm.
so he basically took the top 10 and said, I'm going to create a podcast for each of those and bring in a unique leader. So the first one was public speaking. By far, it was the number one thing that creative professionals, humans fear, but creative professionals especially. So
Mhm.
you got a great speaker coach, Sam Harrison, come on and help people think about that. So definitely wherever you get your podcast, check out The Creative Rising.
I will absolutely link the Creative Rising to the show notes so that people can see it, and then I'm going to subscribe to it because that sounds excellent.
It's great.
That sounds good. I guess just the last question is, how can people get engaged with Matchstick?
Sure. They can find us online at matchstick.com. That's matchstick without the K.com, MATCHSTIC. And, Matchstick House on Instagram and all the other social handles. So, yeah, check us out there.
Excellent. And then I'll also point people towards your book as well. That sounds like a fascinating read.
Yeah, sounds great.
Great. Craig, thank you so much for your time. This has been excellent. And I'm hoping that some folks can get a lot out of this. And we'll be listening to your new podcast and checking out the book and learning a lot more about Matchstick.
All right. Thanks, Jason, for having me. Have a great one.
Thank you. You too.